What happens when a blind grandfather and his service dog board a plane to attend his granddaughter's birthday party, and he ends up being dragged off by his arms, while his loyal companion is threatened to be put to sleep? It all started the moment I boarded the plane. "Sir," the flight attendant said, her voice curt and stiff, "animals are not allowed in the main cabin." Her shoe stopped just across my row, and I turned my head slightly toward the sound. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I simply kept one hand on the broad neck of the German shepherd sitting calmly at my feet. "She's not an animal," he said calmly. "She's my eyes." The dog didn't move. Trained for years to remain still unless commanded, she sat like a statue beside him, ears up, body alert, not even breathing heavy despite the heat. He felt her heartbeat under his hand, steady and loyal. Her name was Grace, and right now, she was the only thing between him and the chaos he felt creeping in. The woman didn't respond right away. He imagined her standing there, arms crossed, looking at him the way people always did, like he was making things up or playing some kind of angle. "Service animal?" she asked finally, like the term itself tasted bad in her mouth. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Certified. I have the papers in my coat." He moved to reach for the inner pocket of his jacket and immediately felt the shift again, tension, fast footsteps, and then her voice, sharper this time. No, just sit still, please. You can't bring a dog like that on a plane. It's against safety regulations." He stopped moving, not because he was scared, but because he'd been here before. Different place, different uniform, same script. "She's trained," he said, more slowly now. "She's flown with me dozens of times. I'm not here to argue." The cabin was filling up. He could hear the other passengers shuffling in, rolling their bags, murmuring to each other. A man bumped into the back of his seat and apologized under his breath. The old man gave a small nod in the direction of the voice, just to show he heard. The attendant didn't budge. "This is a new aircraft. I don't know what your past experiences have been, but on this plane, we follow policy." He turned his face toward her again. He didn't know what she looked like, but he could hear everything he needed in the way she said, "this plane." There was no space in it for people like him. Not with a cane. Not with a dog. Not with dark skin and a slow step. "I'm going to Chicago," he said. "It's my granddaughter's birthday. She turns 7 today." Still, nothing but silence from the woman standing in front of him. "She asked me to be there," he added, softer now. "She made a card with my name on it in glitter. I can't disappoint her. Not again." There was a beat, maybe half a second, where he thought something might shift. But then she spoke again, and the words dropped cold and heavy. "You'll need to disembark until we sort this out." Grace moved for the first time, just her head, turning toward the woman, ears stiff, eyes locked, and he kept his hand on her neck the way he always did when the world around him started to spin just a little faster than he liked, not to calm her. Because she didn't need it, but to calm himself, and even though he didn't say a word, something inside him started pulling tight, like a belt around his chest. The flight attendant said it again, louder now, like maybe if she said it with more force, he'd get scared or embarrassed or give up. And this time it wasn't even about policy, it was just the sound of someone who didn't want to listen, who had already made up her mind. "You'll need to step off the plane until we sort this out," she said, and her voice had that sharp edge, the kind that let you know this wasn't a request. He didn't move, and Grace didn't move either, and for a second it felt like even the rest of the plane stopped moving, like everyone was waiting to see what this old blind man was going to do. And he could feel the weight of all their eyes even if he couldn't see a single one of them. "She's wearing her vest," he said, not to argue, not to fight, just to remind her that there were rules for this too, that maybe she didn't get to make all the decisions just because she was standing and he was sitting. And he told her the paperwork was in his coat pocket, easy to reach. He'd done this before. But when he moved his hand slightly to the side, she stepped forward quick and told him to stop, said something about safety, something about how dogs like that don't belong in a cabin like this, and before he could even get his words out, she touched his arm, just a brush. But it was enough to tell him she wasn't afraid of crossing lines if she felt like it. That's when Grace stood up, slow and silent, like she'd done it 1,000 times, like she wasn't angry but she was ready, like she knew this wasn't just noise anymore. This was something real now, and the woman stepped back just a little, not a lot, but enough for him to notice the change in her breathing. "Is she going to bite me?" the woman asked, and he could hear the fear behind the question, but also the tone, like she already believed her own version of the story. Like Grace was just some big dog and not the reason he could make it through a day without falling into traffic. "No, ma'am," he said, steady, soft, but clear, but she knows when I'm not okay. And that should have been enough. Any other person would have heard that, taken a breath, maybe stepped back, maybe looked at the vest, maybe remembered a damn thing from their training manual. But not her. No. Instead, she took a quick step back and raised her voice like someone was pointing a gun at her. "She's baring her teeth," she shouted, loud enough for half the cabin to turn their heads. "She's not," he said, just as calm. "She hasn't moved. She's looking right at me." She barked again, and now she was moving her arms, waving her hands in the air like Grace was some wild animal, like this old dog who hadn't growled once was about to lunge across 3 rows of seats and rip her throat out. "Step away from the dog," she yelled to someone behind her. "Get someone. Get the captain." He didn't say a word. He didn't move. He just sat there, hand on Grace's back, feeling how steady she still was. Not a twitch. Not a muscle moved. Her ears were up, sure. Her body was tense, but she hadn't budged because he hadn't told her to. That was what made her different from all the noise in that plane. She actually listened. The stewardess started backing away down the aisle like she was in danger, like she needed to protect herself, like she was the victim now, all while throwing words like threat and liability and "this is not protocol" into the air, hoping one of them would stick. "She's showing signs of aggression," she shouted again, still walking backward. "You all saw that, right? You saw her posture." And some of the passengers nodded, not because they believed her, but because it was easier than thinking for themselves. One man pulled out his phone. Another leaned toward the window, pretending he wasn't involved. But Grace didn't care. She stayed still, eyes forward, watching the woman flail and stumble, like she was trained to do, not to attack, not to react, but to wait. He leaned slightly forward, his voice quiet but cutting. "You're scaring people on purpose." She froze. Not for long, just half a second. But it was there. "You want them to think she's dangerous," he said. "You want me off this plane so bad, you're willing to lie." "That dog is not safe," she snapped. "She's safer than you," he said, "because she knows how to stay in her place." The silence after that wasn't long, maybe a breath or two, but it landed hard. And he could feel it, the shift in the air, the moment some of the people around him started seeing what this really was. Not about a dog, not about safety, but about control. She didn't answer right away, and for a second he thought maybe, just maybe, the weight of her own words had finally landed. Maybe she heard how ridiculous she sounded. How small and desperate it was to stand in front of a 70-year-old blind man and pretend his dog was the dangerous one. But that second passed fast, and what came next wasn't doubt, it was fury. The kind that builds when someone realizes they've lost control and they're not ready to give it up. "I'm calling security," she said, and now she wasn't yelling at him. She was yelling down the aisle, pulling a radio from her belt with hands that shook just enough to show how far gone she already was. "We have a non-compliant passenger with an aggressive animal in row 7, requesting immediate assistance," and those words hung in the air like smoke, thick and ugly, impossible to ignore. He didn't look up. He just sat there, one hand on Grace's back, the other resting on the handle of his folded cane, and even though everything inside him wanted to stand, to speak, to explain one more time, he didn't, because he knew better. Because this wasn't about reason anymore, it was about who looked like a threat and who got to say so. And she had the uniform, she had the mic, and now she had a story to sell. He heard the shuffle of movement behind her, the way the passengers leaned out into the aisle just enough to see what was happening but not enough to be seen themselves. And even though no one said anything, their silence was loud, loud in that way only cowards can be. When they're too polite to speak up but too comfortable to care. Someone whispered, "What's going on?" And someone else said, "I think the dog snapped." And that was all it took, 2 sentences, not even verified, and suddenly Grace wasn't a guide dog anymore. She was a problem, she was a headline. She was something to be removed before takeoff. He turned his face toward the voices, not angry, not pleading, just steady, the way you look when you've lived through worse and know better than to beg people who don't want to see. "She's not aggressive," he said, not to them, not even to her anymore, just to himself, like a truth he needed to say out loud so it wouldn't get drowned in all the noise. But the stewardess wasn't listening. She was pacing now, trying to make it look like she was managing a situation instead of escalating one, talking into the radio, saying things like flight delay and passenger refusal and possible risk, and every time she said it, he felt it. The shift in the plane, the way the room started to turn, the way the ground beneath him started to tilt like it always did when people decided his presence was a problem that needed solving. Grace didn't move. Not once. But he felt the slow, heavy breath come from her chest, the one she only did when she was confused but trying to stay calm, and that broke him a little, because she didn't understand why they were treating her like this. She was just doing her job. "She's here to help me," he said, this time louder, but still not yelling. "I don't go anywhere without her, not to the grocery store, not to the doctor, not across the damn street." No one responded. And that silence, that cowardly, cold, calculated silence, told him everything he needed to know about the kind of flight this was turning into. The man in the blazer stepped aside and made a short motion with his fingers, and two more figures appeared near the front of the cabin, uniforms, not airline staff, not flight crew, but airport security, big men with square jaws and black gloves. The kind of people who show up when someone's already decided you're not getting off the plane on your own. "Sir, we're giving you a final chance to disembark voluntarily," the blazer said, voice flatter now, all the fake kindness gone, replaced with the kind of tone that doesn't ask for things, it just tells you what's going to happen if you refuse. "We will escort you and your dog off the aircraft." He didn't move. Grace didn't move. But people around them did, the shifting of legs, the turning of heads, some leaning into the aisle to get a better look, others pulling away like maybe they didn't want to be part of whatever came next, and no one said a word, not yet. Because it's always easier to stay quiet when someone else is the target. "She's a service dog," the old man said, quietly, but not soft, not weak, just tired of repeating the truth to people who didn't want to hear it. "That's not the point anymore," one of the security guys said, stepping forward, like he didn't care if it was a service dog or a lion, like he'd been told what to do, and now he was going to do it. "We were called because of a disturbance. And we're here to remove you." "For what?" the man asked, eyes not blinking, hand resting on Grace's back, steady as ever. "For sitting in my seat?" "For making staff feel unsafe," the blazer replied, and that was it. The line they were going to use, the phrase that lets anyone do anything they want as long as they say they were scared. "She hasn't moved," the man said again, and his voice cracked just a little on that one, not from fear, but from something deeper, the ache that comes when you know they're going to do what they came to do no matter what you say, and all you've got left is the truth. Not because you think it'll save you, but because it's all you've ever had. One of the guards took another step, closer this time, real close, and Grace lifted her head from his foot and looked straight up at the man, didn't growl, didn't bark, just stared, not like a dog, but like something older. Something that knew this wasn't about rules anymore. This was about power. "Do not touch her," the old man said, and this time it wasn't quiet. The guard froze, hand hovering near his vest, like he hadn't expected that kind of voice, not from a man with a cane and clouded eyes. "She's trained to protect me," he said. "If you grab me, she's going to react, not because she's aggressive, but because she thinks I'm in danger." The two guards looked at each other. The blazer hesitated. The stewardess, still hovering in the background, folded her arms like she'd won something, like she was watching the cleanup of a mess she started. And still, nobody in the cabin spoke. Not a word. Not a sound. Because everyone was waiting to see if they'd really do it, if they'd really grab an old blind man out of his seat and drag him off a plane for having a dog that hadn't made a single move since she walked on board. They didn't ask again. One of the guards just reached out, two hands under the man's arms, not rough at first but firm, like he was lifting a suitcase, like the fact that this was a person didn't change the plan, and the old man's back tensed right away, not out of panic, but out of the instinct you develop when you've been handled like that before, not asked, not spoken to, just grabbed. Grace stood up before he even said a word, fast this time, no hesitation, her body pressed tight against his leg, her head turned sharp toward the movement, ears flat, eyes locked, her breath heavier now, not wild, not out of control, but alert, ready. The way she'd been trained to be when someone touched him without permission. "Back off," he said, but his voice wasn't calm anymore, not steady, it was shaking, not from fear, but from something deeper, from the fire that lights when you know something's about to go real wrong and you can't stop it. The guard froze, but only for a second, just long enough to glance at the other one, and that's when the man in the blazer stepped in again, more annoyed than surprised, like this was an inconvenience, like this wasn't a moment that would sit with someone forever. "If the animal gets aggressive," the blazer said, looking at the dog, not the man, not anyone else, we're authorized to sedate it. The words dropped like a slap, not loud, not screamed, just dropped, like he'd done it before, like it wasn't even personal. The old man turned his face toward him, and for the first time since they boarded, there was nothing quiet in his voice. "You're trying to put something in my dog's system?" If she bites, the blazer said, and one of the guards nodded, like they were ready, like it was standard, like it was just another box on the form. She's not going to bite unless you hurt me, the old man said. But if you touch her with a needle, he stopped, not because he didn't have the words, but because the weight of it hit him right there, in the chest, like someone dropped a stone into his ribs. And Grace growled, low, short, barely more than a breath, but enough for everyone near to hear it, to feel it, to know she was there for one reason only, and that reason was right now being pulled out of his seat by two men with gloves and blank faces. Get your hands off me, the man said, and this time he wasn't asking. The guard holding him hesitated, but only for a second, and then someone in the row across the aisle stood up, a younger woman, voice clear and shaking at the same time. Stop, she said. This is wrong. And behind her, a man in a baseball cap got up too. He's not a threat. One more, an older woman with a notepad in her lap, said, I'm recording all of this. The blazer turned around, eyes jumping from voice to voice like he hadn't expected it to turn this way, like the story he was writing just got hijacked by people who decided they weren't going to sit still anymore. The guard still had his hands under the old man's arms, but now he looked unsure, like maybe this wasn't what he signed up for, like maybe it didn't feel right anymore. Grace didn't growl again, didn't lunge, didn't bark, she just stared, ears flat, muscles tense, waiting. And the old man, still half out of his seat, lifted his head toward them all, the passengers, the security, the stewardess hiding in the galley like a coward, and said in a voice that shook the walls even though it barely rose above a whisper. You're not going to touch her, he said again, and this time no one misunderstood what he meant, not the guards holding his arms, not the blazer shifting on his feet, not the stewardess hiding halfway behind the coffee cart, and not Grace, who stood still and silent, but her body told everyone in that cabin what would happen if they crossed a line they couldn't uncross. No choice, one of the guards said, not loud, not angry, just flat, like he was already tired of it, like he'd stopped seeing a person in front of him and just saw a problem that needed to be moved, and they gripped his arms tighter, started lifting him up, inch by inch, while Grace stepped sideways to stay pressed against his leg, confused now, because this wasn't a drill and it wasn't familiar, this was something wrong, and she didn't understand why the man who never let go was suddenly being taken somewhere without her. That's when the cockpit door opened, and everything stopped. Every voice, every motion, even the hum of the cabin seemed to hush when the tall man in the captain's uniform stepped into the aisle, wide shoulders, gray at the temples, deep-set eyes that didn't blink when he looked around and saw exactly what was going on. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't ask for permission. He walked straight up to the mess, looked at the old man, at Grace, at the two guards still holding his arms, and then at the blazer, who opened his mouth to speak but got cut off fast. What the hell is this? The captain asked. Sir, the blazer started. We had a situation. Not with him. You didn't, the captain said. Let him go. The guards didn't move. So he stepped closer. I said let him go. And they did. Not because they wanted to, but because something in his tone told them if they didn't, they'd have a bigger problem than a dog and an old man. The old man sat back down slow, his breath coming short now, not from panic, but from holding it in too long, and Grace rested her head in his lap, like she'd been waiting all along for someone else to finally see him the way she did. I know you, the captain said, looking down at him, voice steady now. You flew with us last winter. Got rerouted in Denver. I remember your dog. She remembers you too, the old man said, eyes barely lifted. You're going to Chicago? Yes, sir. Then you're staying on this flight. And just like that, the room flipped. Not loud, not dramatic, but final. The captain turned to the blazer. He's a registered passenger. She's a registered animal. You can explain to your bosses why you tried to remove a blind man and his service dog mid-boarding. The blazer didn't answer. The stewardess had already slipped to the back of the plane. And the guards? Gone. Not a word. Not a glance. Just quiet retreat, like shadows dissolving when someone finally flips on the lights. People around them started to shift again, but different this time. A few claps, a few nods. One person whispered, "Thank God." Another said, "About damn time." And still nobody looked him in the eye the way Grace did. But it didn't matter anymore, because he wasn't here to teach anybody a lesson. He was just here to make it to Chicago, to keep his word, to get off that plane and hold his granddaughter before the candles melted on her cake. The captain leaned in just before walking back to the cockpit. We'll be in the air in 10 minutes. Don't worry. You'll make it. Thank you. the old man said. Grace gave a short exhale, then laid her head down. And when the plane lifted off 15 minutes later, wheels leaving the runway, clouds parting just enough to catch the morning light, he sat there with one hand on Grace's back, one hand wrapped around the folded cane in his lap, and for the first time that day, his chest loosened just a little, and he let himself believe that some people, not all, but some, still remembered how to do the right thing, even when it took too damn long to get there.